Hello and welcome to the beginner's tutorial for Renoise. Over the course of this video I will be guiding you through the more basic aspects of making music in Renoise by creating a very simple song. We will begin by loading in a sample. First, make sure the disk browser is open by clicking on it. Now click on the sample tab, and if like me you find yourself in the wrong directory, simply click on the library button and this will take you to the default Renoise directory. Now double click on samples, click on kicks, and this will show you the contents of the kicks directory. Double click on kick 01 and this will load the sample into the instrument selector. Press Z on your keyboard and you can hear the sound. Now that we have a sound loaded in, we can begin using it to create music. This is done in this middle section here called the pattern editor. It might look quite complex, but all we need to know at the moment is that this yellow box here is the cursor, and that's what's used to enter notes into the pattern editor. In order to do this, press escape on the keyboard. This enters you into edit mode, shown by this red border around the pattern editor. Now press Z, and as you can see, the note has been recorded. We shall begin by creating a simple 4/4 beat. This is done by moving up and down in the pattern editor with the up and down arrow keys on your keyboard and pressing Z on every fourth line. Every fourth line is shown by a highlighted section, so it should be easy to get them in there, but if you make a mistake it's simply a case of moving up and pressing delete. Now keep going down until you reach the end of the pattern. You can play back what you've just entered by pressing spacebar. And pressing space again stops. It's also possible to use the buttons up here to start and stop the song. You can also turn edit mode on and off by pressing the record button, but it's usually quicker and easier to just use the keyboard. Now let's change the BPM of the song, which is the speed in beats per minute. This can be done in a few ways. You can hover over the value box, hold down the left mouse button and move the mouse up and down. You can also use the arrows at the side here. Clicking with the left mouse button moves it up and down by 1, and using the right mouse button moves it up and down by 10. The third way is to double click on the box and enter in a value manually with the keyboard, finishing with enter. Whatever method you choose, let's set a BPM of 130. Let's load in another instrument. First, press escape in order to exit edit mode so that any button presses we make don't get recorded. Now select an empty slot in the instrument selector, choose hi-hats and double click on hi-hat 01 to load it. Press Z on the keyboard in order to hear the sound. We will be entering notes for the hi-hat on a separate track, so you can move across in the pattern editor with the left and right arrow keys, or you can press tab to skip between entire tracks, and shift and tab moves you backwards through the tracks. Now skip to the top of the pattern using either the slide bar at the side here or pressing F9. The hi-hats will be going on every offbeat between the bass drums, so move down to 2 with the up and down arrow keys, and let's use a shortcut to make entering the notes a lot quicker. Go down to edit step here and push this up to 4. Now when we enter edit mode with escape, you'll notice that when we press Z, it moves down every 4 lines. This is very handy for predictable rhythms like this, because now you can just hold down the Z key and it quickly fills up the entire pattern. We also need a snare drum, so let's load that in. Select an empty sample slot, go to snare, double click on snare 01 and press escape so we don't record anything. Now that's a little high, so let's bring the octave here down to 3, and that's a lot more useful. Again, we'll be recording this on a separate track, so press tab to skip over to the next track and F9 to go to the top. The snares will be going on every second beat on every 8th line, so let's use the edit step to bring this up to 8, but we can also use a shortcut this time. Pressing Ctrl and any number will bring you to that edit step number. In this case Ctrl 8, and let's go down to 4 with the arrow keys. Enter edit mode and hold down Z. Now there are 3 tracks, and at this point it can be worthwhile renaming them so it's easier to organise ourselves and keep track of what we're doing. In order to do this, double click on the track name and enter a new name with the keyboard. So let's do that for all 3 of them. You can also reorganize the tracks by hovering over the name and holding down the left mouse button and moving from side to side with the mouse. Let's put the snare there. Let's listen to the beat so far by pressing spacebar. We can mute and unmute individual tracks by left clicking where it says play on each track, and you can also solo and unsolo with the right mouse button. The hi-hat isn't too interesting at the moment, so let's skip over to its track with tab and begin adding effects through the track DSP section down here. At the top you can find the native effects that come with Renoise. Let's double click on delay and this instantly adds it to the track. This is one of the reasons why we put samples on individual tracks, because if you can listen now, only this hi-hat track has the delay added to it. Let's add another effect, skip down to flanger. As you can see, the flanger has been added after the delay. This is not what we want. We want the flanger to feed into the delay. We can fix this with the buttons here. Click the left one and the flanger moves to the left. All of the effects come with presets. You can access this by clicking on Init, which stands for Initial Preset, which shows you all of the presets that come with this particular effect. Let's choose Wanderer. That's made it a little shrill, so let's soften it up by clicking on Chorus, and that's made it much nicer. Before going any further, you should know exactly how effect chains work. The sound comes in from the track here, and it moves into the premixer. This is something that all tracks have. Any changes you make to the panning, volume and width feed into subsequent effects. Likewise, the sound moves through from left to right through all of the effects and into the post mixer. Again, this is something that all tracks have. This is used to adjust the overall volume and panning of a track. Now let's load in a bass sample. Press escape to exit edit mode, select an empty sample slot. Let's go to bass hits, double click on bass hit 01, skip over to a new track. Let's rename it bass. Go to the top with F9 and let's turn off the soloing. So far we have only been entering notes using the Z key, but most of the number and letter keys on your computer keyboard refer to notes on a piano keyboard. As you can see from this image, the keys in red refer to the current octave in Renoise. The green keys refer to an octave above, and the blue keys are 2 octaves above. For now though, we'll just be using the Z and Q keys. Enter edit mode. Set the edit step to 4, hold down Z, and let's enter notes in between those notes using the Q key, which is 1 octave above. And press play with spacebar. Now as you add more sounds to a song, it obviously gets louder. You can change this with the master volume up at the top left here. This changes the volume of the entire song. Let's move that down to the left so it's easier to hear me. Now let's move on to automation, which allows you to change the effect settings of a DSP as the pattern is playing. Let's put in a filter effect. There are many kinds of filters that come with Renoise. The one we'll be using is HP or high pass. This cuts off the lower frequencies of sounds in this track. The parameter which we will be automating is cut off. So click on automation, look for filter and double click on cut off. Note the numbers across the top here. This is basically a timeline of the pattern. The numbers correspond to the numbers up and down here in the pattern editor. The white line is just our cursor position, which is currently at 10. In order to demonstrate how the automation works, we can use the 2 presets at the bottom here. Click on randomization and you can see it's assigned a random value on every line. Press play to hear the results. Let's turn it up a bit. If you skip to track DSPs, you can see how the cutoff is now jumping around randomly. Go back to automation and let's choose exponential envelope. you go back to track DSPs, you can see how the cutoff is rising very slowly and accelerates as it goes, coming right to the top so that it cuts off the sound completely in this track. So let's create our own automation envelope. Go back to automation, click on the scissors button here to cut out the current envelope, and place some points on the grid at the start and end with the left mouse button. We'll also be putting one in the middle, which is line 32. If you miss, you can hover over the point, hold down the left mouse button and drag from side to side and put it there. Now if you hold down the left control button on your keyboard, you can see the exact value of the point. This also prevents you from moving side to side, so it's locked in place and you get much more fine tuning. If you let go of the left control button, you move up and down very fast. So using the fine tuning, let's put it to 0.05 and we'll make the end the same. Let's make the middle 1 kHz. Press play and go back to track DSPs. We'll begin changing the resonance, which, as you can see from the graphical representation on the side here, puts a large peak right where the cutoff frequency is. Let's change that to 5 using the arrow keys here, and if you can remember from the BPM example, if you use the right mouse button it moves it up by a large amount, and using the left mouse button changes it by a small amount. Now let's begin adding extra patterns through the pattern sequencer on the left. You can add new ones by using the plus button. The way the pattern sequencer works is when you press play, the song starts at the beginning, moves its way through this pattern, and when it reaches the end, moves down to the next in the sequence here, and further down, and it keeps going until it reaches the end. Then it begins at the start again. You can move your position up and down in the pattern sequencer by using the scroll wheel while your mouse is in the pattern sequencer. If you use the scroll wheel on the pattern editor, it moves that up and down instead. You can also use the scroll bar at the side, and we can remove patterns using the minus button. You can also insert a brand new pattern by using this button here. You can tell this is new by the fact it has a 1. The old pattern had 0. Any changes we make in this new pattern 1 do not affect pattern 0 at all. But what we want to do is clone this existing pattern 0 using this button here. And you can see we have a new pattern 1, but absolutely everything has been copied over and no changes we make here will affect pattern 0. Even our automation has been copied over. You can see the automation is present by the jagged line here. If you press that, it's also a shortcut to the automation tab. So let's insert some differences between the patterns so we can hear the sequence in action. First, select the instrument from the disk browser this time and scroll down to the bottom, select a new slot and double click on Pad Athmo 2. Let's skip over to a new track and name it Melody. And turn off edit mode so we can listen to this without recording. You'll need to hold down the keys as you play them to get the full effect. And if you use I on the keyboard, which is 2 octaves above our octave of 3, that sounds about right. The reason you need to hold it down to get the full effect is because there is a loop on this instrument. If you go to the sample editor tab, you can see what I mean. As you hold down the key, it scrolls through this waveform representation of the sound, and it goes from the start point of this loop to the end point and cycles through it as long as the key is held down. There are a few types of loops. There's no loop, there's a forward loop which goes from left to right, backward which goes from right to left, and our ping pong which goes from left to right, back to left again, and so on, as long as the key is held down. You can scroll through the other sounds to have a look at them. And there's actually a key difference between these ones and the Pad Athmo. These other sounds, they have 2 waveforms. That is because they're in stereo, and the Pad Athmo is just in mono. There's another difference between this instrument sound and the samples we've been using so far. When you let go, there's a sustain. It keeps going and goes down in volume. We can see this through the instrument editor. We won't be going into much detail in the instrument editor or the sample editor. This is just a beginner's tutorial, but it can be useful to see the differences between instruments and plain samples. If you press the key again and watch this volume at the side here, you can see it increases as the key is pressed and it's held at the top, and when you let go of the key, the volume comes down. And at the side here we also have another loop. This is a LP Moog, or low pass filter, and this is adjusting the cutoff. As long as the key is held down and the sound is active, it keeps going, producing this slight warbling effect. Back to the pattern editor, press escape to enter edit mode, skip up to pattern 0, press I and press play. Now take note of what's happening here. The sound keeps going. This is because the sample will keep looping until we tell the pattern editor that the note has been released. We can do this by pressing caps lock in edit mode. This inserts an off note. As you can hear, at that point the note is released and the sound begins to die away. Now if you're wondering how I managed to skip up to line 16 so quickly, it's through the key F10. The keys F9 to F12 all take you to different positions in the pattern. F9, as you can remember, takes you to the top, F10 takes you 1/4 of the way down, F11 halfway down, F12 3/4, and if you want to skip to the end, you can just press the end key. So press F10, delete the off note, F11, and let's insert a note with the 0 key above O and P on the keyboard. This is a D sharp, as you can see here. All the other notes we have entered so far have been C's, and this is in the octave of 5. You can see the alternating octaves of the bass here, 3/4, 3/4, and this number here is actually the instrument number. 0/4 for the melody, the bass is 3, hi-hat 1, snare 2, and kick 0. So let's go to pattern 1, go to the top. We'll enter an A sharp with 7. Let's go to F11 again, and we'll enter a C sharp with 9. Go back up to pattern 0, press play, and this track will now show us the difference between the two patterns in this sequence. Let's adjust the volume a little bit through the post mixer here. 1.5 should do it. Let's add some more patterns to the sequence using the plus button. We would like the sequence to be the same, 0, 1, 0, 1. So scroll up and use the arrows at the side here to change the number to 0. Now open the pattern matrix, either using this button, or you can also use the minus key on your keyboard, which is above P. The pattern matrix is a graphical representation of what's happening within your song. You can see the tracks along the top here, and beneath each track are a series of boxes. Each box shows you what's happening within that track at each position within the pattern sequence. The pattern matrix can also be used to make changes within your song. If you hover over this box and press the middle mouse button, now do the same here and press play. The X's signify that this track will be muted at this point in the pattern sequence. As you can hear, when it comes up, the old sound will fade out and no new notes will be played within this track. This is not the same as muting the track via the play button here. When you do this, it is off permanently until you turn it back on. So when we come upon this box that has not got an X on it, the sound plays again. This is very useful because we can still use the same pattern, 0, 1, 0, 1, and make changes within the song without having to create brand new patterns. The pattern matrix can also be used to copy and paste various sections within your song. If you click here at the top left, hold down the left shift key on your keyboard and press here. we have now selected the 3 drum tracks. Now if you hold down left control and left shift on your keyboard, press and hold down the left mouse button and move your mouse above the existing pattern, we have now created a new pattern 2, and we have copied and pasted those 3 drum tracks into it. We will begin using this as a short introduction to the song, and this is done by changing the pattern length. All previous patterns have been 64 lines long. We can change the length of it by either using the arrow keys or the various other methods which I've shown you previously. If you make it 32, it is now half the length of all other patterns, and it serves well as a short introduction to the song. Now let's advance the song by adding extra patterns at the end. Scroll down to the second 0 pattern, press clone, go down to 1, press clone again. Now let's move the 3 so that it appears just before the 4. Click on it, hold down the left shift key and drag until it appears before 4. Now what we'll be doing in these 2 patterns, 3 and 4, is we will be matching the bass to the melody. We could enter the notes by hand on the keyboard, but there's actually an easier way of doing this. If you select from line 32, press the left mouse button and hold, drag down to the bottom so that we've selected all of the notes there. Open the advanced edit box here, go down to transpose and press the +1 button. As you can see, this has moved the pitch of the notes up by 1, and keep pressing +1 until it matches D sharp, which is what the melody is on this section. Now go to the next pattern, pattern 4. We have C sharp here, so just press +1 once. Now scroll to the top and select the top half of the pattern. Press -1 until it matches A sharp. Now go up to pattern 3, press play, and as you can hear, the bass pitches now match what the melody is doing. Since the pattern matrix and advanced edit box are open, we've actually covered up some tracks in the pattern editor. We could just close these panels, but instead let's delete the tracks that we're not actually using. Hover over track 6, press the right mouse button and select delete track. Now do the same for the others. If you want to add a track, you simply press the right mouse button again and press insert track. Note that as we have deleted these tracks, space has been made over in the pattern matrix. If you want to close the gap here, just hover over the right side, press and hold the left mouse button, move the mouse, and it will slot into place. As you'd probably notice, there are 2 extra tracks on the right here. There's the master track, which we will come to later, and there is a send track. Send tracks always appear after the master channel because they behave slightly differently from normal tracks. The way they work is you can feed in audio from any number of audio tracks, it gets sent over to the send track, and any changes that you make here affects all of that collective audio. To demonstrate this, we will begin sending audio from the kick and snare tracks over to this send track, and to make things a little clearer, let's rename this drums. Next, go to the kick track, go down to track DSPs and scroll down until we come to routing. Double click on send device. Note our receiver is the drum send track. If we had other send tracks, we could choose between them with the arrows here. Now go to snare and use the send device again. Now go over to the drum send track. We'll scroll up until we come to distortion. Now press play, and note that any changes we make to the distortion here affects both the snare drum and the kick drum. The distortion comes with 2 other notable parameters. There's the wet mix, which is the sound leaving the distortion, and there's a dry mix, which is the sound entering the distortion effect before any of the effects have been applied to it. You can use these 2 to to adjust how much distortion is actually applied to the sound. Let's choose drums mid-cut to give it a little bit of extra bite. Now let's create an ending for our song. Scroll down to the bottom of the pattern sequence and insert a new empty pattern. Let's change the length of this pattern from 64 to 128. Go up to pattern 3, press Ctrl A on your keyboard. This selects everything in the pattern editor. Now press Ctrl C and this copies everything into the buffer. Now scroll down to pattern 5 and we want to paste in here. Make sure the cursor is at the top left in the kick track and press Ctrl V to paste. Now this is important because we always paste from the cursor position. If for instance we were down here and we press Ctrl V, everything that we have selected is now pasted from that point, which is not what we want. You probably recognize these commands, the control commands. These are common to many programs and Renoise is no exception. The other one is Ctrl Z, which does undo. You press that, we have undone our mistake. Likewise, Ctrl Y also works. If we want to redo that, just press that and you can redo anything. This doesn't just affect things in the pattern editor. If for instance we make a change to the panning here and we want to get it back, simply press Ctrl Z and it is undone. Next, go up to pattern 4, press Ctrl A again and Ctrl C. Now go back to pattern 5, press F11, which as you remember takes us halfway down the pattern. Go over to the kick track and press Ctrl V to paste that in. It would be nice if the song gradually faded out at the end, and we can do this very easily through the use of the master track. The master track affects all sounds in the entire song. You can treat it like any other normal track, you can even apply effects, but what we need to do here is just use the automation for the volume, and if we use an exponential envelope we can make this fade out gradually. Now this is the wrong way round. We can use the flip left to right button here and press play. You can hear the entire song gradually fades out. What happens at this point is that the song loops back to the beginning, and we want to prevent this from happening. We can do this through the use of special pattern effects commands. Open this tab here and you can see all the commands that are available to you. This is still just a beginner tutorial, so we won't be going into any detail here. Just select global commands and the first one sets BPM. What this allows you to do is change the BPM as the song is playing, but if you set this to 0, what happens is when the song reaches this point it comes to an automatic stop. The final thing that we can do is, like naming the tracks, we can also name the patterns, which allows us to keep better track of what's happening within the song. In order to do this, select the left edge of the pattern editor, hold with the left mouse button and drag to the right. You can now see some text boxes which you can use to enter in some short descriptions. Note with this one, section A has been duplicated because these are both pattern 0. Likewise, this will happen with section B. Let's name this bass A since the bass changes here. Bass B and ending. That's it for this beginner tutorial on Renoise. Don't forget to check out the help menu within the Renoise program itself. There you will find links to the online tutorials and manuals. There are also lists of the pattern effect commands, keyboard shortcuts, and from there you can also visit the community forum and renoise.com. The best advice from me, however, is just to play around within Renoise, try variations on the things that have been shown in this video, and also experiment with things that have not. Don't be afraid of making mistakes, and you'll soon find new and exciting ways to create music.